All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ole Miss After Dark. I'm joined here once again by Hitch, just like I am every single time that I hit this record button. He's here again, can't get rid of him. But then a special guest here, Sam Doughton, staff writer for Middle Tennessee State. We said we're going to bring him in. That way he can tell us everything we need to know about MTSU heading into this game Saturday. Sam, how you doing today, bud?
Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Yeah. I appreciate you joining us here, man. It's should be a lot of fun and hopefully be able to gain some knowledge about what the Rebels are looking at this coming up Saturday. The first thing I wanted to talk about though was the hiring of Derek Mason. Right, this is a guy that had a lot of success as a defensive coordinator at Stanford, and then went on took the Vanderbilt job, and you can't really blame a man for taking an SEC job, right? But that was a program that didn't have a whole lot of resources. While he was a good coach, he wasn't able to bring in the type of players that you need to compete at the SEC level. And that's not a slight at Derek Mason by any stretch. As you've seen, everybody has those kind of troubles up there at Vanderbilt. Even though Clark Lee maybe start getting them going a little bit, we talked at length a little bit yesterday and a couple days before that about their win over Virginia Tech this past weekend. But I think Derek Mason's a great coach. Kind of what's the feeling around Murfreesboro there when they made that hire?
Mason, sort of maybe came a little bit out of left field for some people in Murfreesboro when he was first hired. He wasn't on a lot of the initial, sort of hot lists that you saw when the job opened. But he's somebody that very clearly moved his way up in the process pretty early on from those you talked to internally, and really impressed, particularly the university administration. I think in the interview process was somebody that had a vision for what he thought the program could be, and had some ties locally, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching at Vanderbilt, which is about 40 minutes up the road from where we are in Murfreesboro. That encourage people. One of the big criticisms of the previous head coach Rick Stockstill was that he didn't recruit local enough. His sort of recruiting hotbed tended to be the Atlanta metro area, state of Alabama, particularly North Alabama, and then Central and South Florida. So not really a lot of Middle Tennessee kids were getting looks, even though we had a lot of Middle Tennessee kids that were getting college offers all over the place. And that's become a priority for Mason and his staff right away. And they've made a lot of good inroads in Tennessee high schools, getting in conversation with kids that maybe they weren't, the Middle Tennessee wasn't in the conversation for before. And competing with G5 peers like Liberty in our league, and then some Sun Belt teams as well, Troy, Arkansas State, to mention just a couple, that they're winning recruiting battles for. So I think off the field, that has been where Mason has impressed the most so far. Obviously, we're only one game in, so that there's only so much on the field, product to evaluate so far. But the other big thing was that he's been real active in the community, real, visiting civic clubs, engaging with the Boys and Girls Club, trying to bring the whole city of Murfreesboro, which is a very fast growing community, on board and support their local G5 programming, to point out that, our tickets are very affordable. It's a really fun place to be on a Saturday. And, if he can get the football product to the point where it's a really fun product on the field, which I think people are confident he has the vision to do, he hopes to get the fans on board as well, and is putting in the work, outside of the football office to do that. So, been really good reviews of the off season so far. You're only undefeated once as a football coach, at the G5 level, it tends to be, and he's made the most of it and brought a lot of people on board. I think if we didn't have a rain delay this past week, against Tennessee Tech that had caused, a lot of people to leave the stadium, we were projected for one of the largest crowds we've had in a very long time. Part of that was we were playing a historical rival in Tennessee Tech back from the team's 1AA days. But part of that was the work Mason and the rest of the middle staff has put in to re-engage fans that maybe were disengaged by the 18-year Stockstill era. So it's been really exciting so far. We can get into some more of the X's and O's as we sort of go through the team and the roster. But I think that's the biggest thing about Mason is how much he's done off the field, philosophically, maybe to sort of change the perception of the program locally.
Yeah, that's interesting, because today in this NIL era, you have to have money, and you have to have the community buy-in. You have to have and if anybody has done that well, it's been Lane Kiffin here at Ole Miss, and kind of what he's done to get everybody to buy in, right? And kind of from a ground up approach, it sounds like maybe Derek Mason is having that same effect there in Murfreesboro with the Boys and Girls Clubs and donations and different things like that. But another thing I found interesting as you were talking there was the previous coach before you said his recruiting pipeline, or to use some NCAA college football 2025 lingo here, the game that I've never played. But his pipeline was Atlanta metro area down to Florida. And, what's interesting about that is you're down there fighting Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, like even the smaller group of 5 schools. And then Florida, UCF, you're having to battle against all these different schools, even in Alabama, Auburn and Alabama, but in Tennessee, right? Like you've got Tennessee and it just seems like it would make a lot of sense that what Derek Mason is doing is making sure that you have your backyard locked down and recruiting from inside of the state instead of trying to go out and battle all these other top tier programs.
Our level too, the G5s, you tend to get a lot of kids in the portal that are coming down that maybe you missed on in high school that were, more high 3 stars, low 4 stars that, go to these bigger programs and maybe don't find the playing time they're looking for. And then when they enter the portal, you now have a relationship built up with the kid. We definitely got a few of those from those areas, on their way there. We got a few local kids that way as well. But it's clearly been a high priority for Mason. And, for me, it's curious for me because I think the reason the previous staff was so heavily invested in those areas was just sort of a population density thing. It was a numbers game. There was more players in South Florida, more players in Atlanta than maybe there are in Tennessee in total. But I think, Tennessee high school football is growing, really well as the state is growing. And so there's definitely more of an opportunity here, particularly, I think, one benefit that Mason has that he doesn't have at Vanderbilt is to get kids into Middle Tennessee than it is to get into Vanderbilt. Yes. So maybe he has some good relationships with coaches for guys that he wanted previously, but maybe, couldn't qualify at Vanderbilt for whatever reason. But have a good shot, to get into a school like Middle Tennessee and, change their life with the impact of a college degree, obviously, but, make an impact for the Blue Raiders on the field as well. And you just look at the success he's had recruiting. And another big critique of the previous staff is they really hunted for diamonds in the rough. We were getting a lot of guys where maybe we were their only FBS offer. And, truthfully, a lot of those guys turned out to be much better players than their offers indicated. But I think, most fans and most people who follow the program, tend to think that as long as if you're shooting higher, those hits are going to be even bigger hits than you would be otherwise.
But again, it's a numbers game, right? It's the same thing you just said a while ago. Like it's a numbers thing, right? You can find that diamond in the rough, but it's not a guaranteed thing that you're going to find that. So you can't just go cherry picking the ones you want. It's a numbers thing. You get a lot of them in, and then you start figuring out how they're going to fit into your actual game plan, right? That diamond in the rough may not be the best fit for the way that you run your offense or defense, however you're looking at it. It's there's a lot that goes into it. Sounds like Mason's got it on lock up there in Middle Tennessee.
One big thing you hear about these coaching changes, you often go sort of opposite of what you had before, and often you see that on the field. Rick Stockstill was a very good offensive-minded coach. Had a lot of really good ideas, particularly sort of in those air raid schemes to get guys into space. Mason, is a very good defensive coach, as y'all well know. Has a very strong reputation on the defensive side of the ball. Probably is right now the best defensive mind in Conference USA as far as head coaches go, and even defensive coordinators to some extent. So it's been interesting to sort of see how philosophically things have switched so much both on and off the field in such a short amount of time. And I'm just curious to see sort of in year 2 and year 3 how we sort of see these results happen, because right now they're sort of in transition in a lot of different ways, both offense and defense, that where maybe things aren't exactly where they want them to be on either side as far as personnel goes.
Yeah, and a couple of things that you said there that really interested me that I've been thinking about. Number one, the transfer portal guys coming from a Power 4 league now. Now we're down to 4 of them, right? Coming down from that league to the G5. We see that a good bit now, but also the academic part as well. He struggled recruiting at Vanderbilt, but the part nobody ever talked about was how hard it is to get into that school. I mean, there were kids that were interested in going there that just couldn't qualify and get accepted in there. I thought I saw something the other day where Middle Tennessee took, what were they, like top 5 as far as overall transfers they brought into the program, something like that. Like he really went out there, attacked it hard, and with his recruiting prowess, with the connections he has in that area, I would assume that he was able to do a really good job getting guys into this program. That way they can start learning, right? One thing I always look for in the transfer portal, how many years are left? Is this a 1-year rental, or did he go more the style of, hey, I've got this guy for 2 more years, possibly even 3 more years. That way they can come in, learn what we're trying to do, learn our culture, start building it up that way. And then next year, maybe potentially taking a pretty good step with those kinds of guys.
A big mixture of guys. We have 60 total new players on the roster. That's tied for third most in all of FBS football. About 40 of those guys are scholarship guys. So you mix in some walk-ons, in there as well. And so you have a mixture of guys. A guy like Omari Kelly, who's a wide receiver we're going to talk about later. Transfer from Auburn, has got 2 years of eligibility left. He's a guy they feel they can build around, for at least a couple years on offense. And then, you also have another, transfer wide receiver, Hayes Sutton, came to us from Duke. He's a guy that's only got 1 year left. And so you sort of see that for other roster. Brendan Harris, a safety that played for Mason at Vanderbilt, then went to Wake Forest after Mason left there. Has had some injuries. He's one of, a handful of 7th-year guys in college football this year. He was his last year of eligibility at Middle Tennessee to sort of, set the culture, set the foundation. He's a guy Mason targeted early as someone that knows what the culture looks like and can sort of help set that standard early on. So it's been a fun mixture. It's fun for me to see sort of what coaches have what connections on staff. How did this guy find out about us? And that was a fun process for me in camp. To meet some of these guys, because I still look at the depth chart for us, and I have to remind myself, okay, this guy was a former offensive lineman. This guy's a former linebacker. Oh yeah, this guy came from this junior college, and so it's been a lot of new faces to learn. But there are still some holdovers that are sort of forming the core of the team that I know the staff was excited to retain, sort of in that coaching transition, particularly the quarterback, Nicholas Vadiato.
Yeah, that I'm glad you pointed out that was the safety from Wake Forest. That was his 7th year of eligibility. I was sitting here in my mind when you said that he played for Mason back at Vanderbilt, trying to add the years up together, trying to figure out how he could be eligible now that he is at MTSU. But yeah, injuries and stuff like that. There's a kid down at, I think at Miami, he's in his 8th year of eligibility, that tight end that came from Oregon or whatever it is. So just a wild time in college football, having to keep up with this kind of stuff, because we used to never see anything like it, right? After year 5, no matter what, you were gone for the most part. So take me into what Middle Tennessee is going to be looking for. Obviously, Derek Mason, a coach that has coached in SEC stadiums before. He's not going to be intimidated by the environment in Oxford or anything. He's coached in that stadium and other SEC stadiums throughout his coaching career. So what do you think Derek and his staff are looking for out of his team as they travel down to Oxford this Saturday?
With Mason's team, it obviously starts on the defensive side of the ball, and the biggest key for them this week has been limiting the explosives for Ole Miss's offense. If they can keep Ole Miss in front of them to the extent that's possible with the skilled guys that Ole Miss has, they're going to have more success. They're going to be able to stay in the game longer and maybe be able to make use of an offense that is sort of designed to control the clock a little bit. Take its time with the play clock and be able to move up the field in chunks and not so much, go for the big explosive all the time necessarily. So defensively, it's going to be about, being strong in the backside. I think the secondary is probably where they're the deepest at the moment right now on that side of the ball. So they feel like they have, maybe not an advantage in the matchup, but they have the ability to do what they need to do to stay in the game, pretty long. And then, in these sorts of games, you got to have some weird things go your way. If you're as big an underdog as Middle Tennessee is, when they went and played at Miami 2 years ago and pulled off a big upset of the Hurricanes, winning by 2 touchdowns there. Couple, defensive touchdown was in that game. I'm pretty sure they had a special teams play. They got a couple 4th down stops, had a 98-yard touchdown pass, had another 63-yard touchdown pass. You got to have some unusual, big swing plays to happen. And, the goal is to keep it close enough that when one of those happens, you can take advantage of it. So, they're going to be going for turnovers. They're going to be, trying to make stuff happen, on special teams and on defense to keep themselves in the game. But I think that starts with making sure you're in a position to make use of those. That's limiting the explosive on the offensive side of Ole Miss.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting too, because we've already talked about Derek Mason being such a great defensive mind. I just kind of wonder, and I know you can't answer this, but I was thinking about this earlier. I wonder what Derek Mason is thinking from a game plan standpoint, because historically there's this narrative about Lane Kiffin being this coach that likes to throw the ball around, chuck it downfield, score 60 points a game. But really, when you look at it, his entire career has been run-based. He's always run the ball more than he's thrown it. He wants to establish the game with the run, set up the pass with the run. He wants to pound the rock and then hit you with, like you're talking about, the big plays over the top, the chunk plays. That's where he wants to hit you. But then you look at what Ole Miss did last week, and we didn't run the ball particularly well, but man, we threw it all over the dang place. We obviously we lose Quinshon Judkins, and so the big question is, what does this running game look like? We bring in a few transfer offensive linemen to go with a really experienced group. We're a really good group up front. You bring back Bentley, who's played a bunch of tailback and at Ole Miss and SMU, and then Henry Parrish coming in from Miami, another good back. But then you look at the skill positions, like you said, Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Watkins, if he plays, pre-scoring at tight end, and then, of course, Jackson Dart at quarterback. It looks like all of your talents on the outside and behind the center for a coach that loves to run the ball traditionally. So I just wonder what's in Derek's head of, okay, do I need to play the run here and then try to worry about the back end when it comes to it, or if he tries to start out stopping the pass and forcing Ole Miss to run. I just think that's an interesting chess match going into Saturday.
That's what the RPOs that Kiffin's known for are designed to do, to put the defense in that conflict where they have to pick something. You can't stop both of them. So you got to, what can you stop? What's the least bad in those situations? And if you choose wrong, you're going to get burned a lot of the time. So, I don't know exactly what the game plan is for middle. Obviously, limiting explosives is far easier said than done when you have the guys you mentioned on the outside. And I know, Coach Kiffin's talked this week a lot about running the ball, in his press availability, wanting to improve on that from over the weekend as well. So I think the chess match on that side of the ball is going to be very interesting, something to watch early on in the first quarter to sort of figure out, what the pace of the game is going to be, what the tone's going to be early on. Because if they're hitting those RPOs, whether it's big runs up the middle or big passes on the outside, could be a very long afternoon for boys in blue. But everybody, if they can handle a little bit of it, they're going to stick around. I think maybe longer than some Ole Miss fans would like at times. But we'll see what happens with the ball when the ball's dropped.
Yeah, and Kiffin really hammered the point home before Furman about really wanting to run the ball too, and we all saw what happened that game too. So going into this week, I'm more of I'll believe it when I see it, even though I think that is something we need to do. That's something Ole Miss needs to work on. They need to get that running game going before you get into SEC play. But that was the first thing that popped out to me in the press conference. Like you said, Kiffin said he wanted to establish the run, run the ball, and be really aggressive there. And I just had flashbacks to the week before where his press conference was the exact same thing when they asked about Furman. Yeah, we got to get out there. We got to, be physical, establish the run. We got to run the ball, run the rock, run. And then you're up 60 to nothing or whatever it was there in the third quarter. And we're still chucking it downfield, running tempo and all that. So I will believe that when I see it with Ole Miss trying to establish the run there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about – go ahead, Ditch.
Yeah, well, I just was looking at Conference USA and the teams in Conference USA, right? Liberty, Jack State, Western Kentucky, and even FIU, a couple of years ago. Yeah, good conference, but those feel like teams that get plays in chunks to me. Like I think about those teams and I think about that RPO offense that you're talking about. So I guess my point is that, do you think that Middle Tennessee State by seeing this type of offense with these other teams, right? Like they have some experience. They're not coming in, just like you said, the DBs are probably the most experienced group. And so having some experience, seeing these types of offenses week in and week out, that gives them, like you said, not the advantage, but it does help them, right, to play defense once they've seen it a bunch. I think that may be a slight advantage, now that you've pointed out that RPO offense that Lane likes to run and kind of looking at the Conference USA here, they see that offense all the time. And so they're not going to be surprised by anything. So I think it's going to be interesting.
USA runs a lot of those spread type schemes, as you pointed out, and I think a lot of that's sort of predicated on the type of athletes that can get in the trenches. They typically don't have huge offensive lines, and typically the defensive lines in the league tend to be better than the offensive lines are. So when you're doing that, you're having to trust your quick passing game and work a lot on finding guys in space to sort of mask maybe that deficiency at times. So that's why a lot of those offenses tend to lean that way. But you're right, Hitch. There is potential for guys to be having to run stuff that they're going to have to run later in the year or have already run that might give them a little bit more advantage that people are thinking about. My one caution there is that this is a group that hasn't played together a ton just because they're all coming from all sorts of places. Only 2 returning starters on that defensive side. So while they all have a ton of experience seeing stuff like that, where at all their previous stops, they maybe haven't all seen it together as a collective. So that's what I'm curious to sort of see what happens on Saturday.
Yeah. But a while ago, you said, they might keep it, be closer at times than Ole Miss fans would like. And this is one of those matchups to watch that is why they could be closer than at times than Ole Miss fans like, is because on that side of the ball, they're used to seeing this type of offense with these quick passes or these quick hit runs or these play action, then quick pass. And so that they, may be able to handle that a little easier than some other defenses.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, can you tell Ole Miss fans kind of what to expect from Middle Tennessee, offensively and defensively, and maybe a player or two on each side of the ball for Ole Miss fans to keep their eye on, somebody that might stand out to us?
AirPods are going out, so I'm going to switch to my headset I have here real quick.
Okay.
And I'll be happy to pop in.
All right. You're muted, Sam.
There you go. Perfect.
All right.
There we go.
Yeah, good to go now. All right. So what I was saying is, can you? Did you hear the question?
Yeah. Offensive scheme to start off. I think that, what might surprise some fans to see is that it's kind of a run control offense. It's an offense that uses the tight end a lot. A comment I made earlier this week is I'd have to go look at the snap count, but they were about running 2 tight end sets as often as they were running 1 tight end sets. Sort of this past week. And, that's very unusual for us because this is a team that had, been in sort of an air raid, disciple the latter half of Stockstill's tenure in particular. And so had run a lot of, 4 out, type schemes before. So it's a big scheme transition on the offensive side to lean so heavily on those tight ends. And, they're doing that because they want to be able to run the ball. And they were able to do that, very successfully, probably in the first, quarter and a half of Saturday's game. And then the second half, Tennessee Tech sort of loaded the box. And, there was an adjustment until sort of, the last, drive or two sort of in the game. Now, part of that was probably because they were trying to milk the clock a little bit, ice the game. Hopefully there'll be a quicker reaction, in the future. But, so I think that's maybe something unusual that you don't see that often, really at any level of college football, is how often they're going to be running. Now they're still in shotgun most of the time. They're not really going under center necessarily. But it's definitely an offense that's looking to establish the run and use some bigger sets than particularly teams at the G5 level play to do so. And, jury's still out on how well that will work when we get into conference play. That's probably the biggest question mark I have, for the total season, is sort of seeing how that offense does the whole time, particularly when you're taking a roster that didn't have a single tight end listed on it last year. We maybe had 1 or 2 that were maybe more tight ends than wide receivers, but we're still listed at wide receivers. But they use a lot of them. We have 5 guys listed as co-starter at tight end in our depth chart this week. So that's the probably the biggest thing to look out for is sort of the usage of tight end that Bodie Reader has. And, he does some interesting things with motion to try to get matchups he wants, whether it be, moving the box in some way or getting a guy in space on the edge. And he had a pretty good script at the start of the game against Tennessee Tech. So he seems to have that part of, being offensive coordinator, scripting that first drive. Early results are good. So it wouldn't surprise me if they had some early success, against Ole Miss's defense, for that reason, just until you get out of sort of the scripted plays, and then it gets into, sort of the chess match the rest of the way. Defensively, it's Derek Mason's always been a 3-4 type guy in a lot of his schemes, but the defense isn't really built to run the 3-4 as current personnel on the roster. So it kind of looks like a 3-4, but they run stuff that looks more like a 4-3 when the ball's actually snapped. Is sort of the way it's been described to me. We list the guys at a 4-3, but you'll often see 5 people up front on the line. For instance, you'll see the four defensive linemen, and then you'll have an outside backer sort of sneaking up in those situations. It can make it dynamic at times. You don't really know where pressure might be coming from when they do that, but it's still a group that's figuring out, particularly in the front seven, that has less experience than sort of the secondary does at the moment. But a lot of talented skill guys, particularly in the back end. John House, the fourth, got an interception. He's transferred from Vanderbilt. That's had some success in the SEC, played a good bit for Clark Lee, particularly his last year there. But came to Middle Tennessee looking for more opportunity and got a start in his first game and made a big impact play that set up a touchdown against the Golden Eagles. Offensively, a name I mentioned earlier, Nick Vadiato's guy you got to know. He's a quarterback that I really think didn't have to stay at Middle Tennessee. Probably could be starting somewhere bigger had he played his cards differently, sort of in that coaching transition. But was loyal to the school and also knew that he had a good shot to retain the job here. And there's only 134 starting quarterback jobs in FBS football. So, who am I to say? And he's a big leader for this team, on and off the field, but has some dual threat ability that maybe doesn't flash, until you see him sort of roll out on a read option or roll out, sort of in a scramble. Didn't get a chance to do that a ton last week, but, did it a lot last year. And was a bright spot on a team that went 4-8 a season ago, and somebody that the staff was thrilled to be able to build around, sort of in their first year here.
Yeah. You talking about the tight ends? Actually, was listening to another podcast yesterday or day before. I can't remember what it was, but I think they said that Middle Tennessee had played 5 tight ends within the first 2 drives of the game on Saturday, something like that. That's just something you don't see really anywhere, But look, if those are going to be your playmakers, you got to find ways to get them in the game, get them involved in the offense. Sounded like he did a pretty good job of doing that. So I'm all about playing as many tight ends as you can, man. I love 2 tight end sets. I mean, let's run it all game long as far as I'm concerned. But that's not quite how we're built in Oxford at the under the current regime, right? We do have 2 or 3 really good ones outside of pre-scoring, but we're going to keep spreading that sucker out with wideouts and maybe even a back out there too. So it's going to be really interesting though to see how Ole Miss, this is going to be a step up from Furman, right? It's going to be steadily steps up all the way down the schedule. So they've got to stay focused. They've got to do their jobs. And we know that Derek Mason, at the very least, is going to have a good plan coming into this game on Saturday. He always is. He's always been a very good defensive coach. So I know he's going to have something up his sleeve, particularly early on for Ole Miss to try to get them off their game. And you talking about the defense there, never knowing where the pressure's coming from. I can only imagine all the different things he's going to try to throw at Jackson Dart just to get him to look a certain way. Just throw him off beat for a half a second, and that can change everything on the defensive side of the ball. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm ready to get this thing going. And I really appreciate you joining us here and telling us about Middle Tennessee and kind of catching us up on the team and what to expect here coming up for this game Saturday. So, Sam, really appreciate your time and very, very insightful. And good luck Saturday.
Well, thanks, guys. Really appreciated, y'all having me on and getting a chance to share a little bit about us with maybe some folks who don't watch G5 football all the time, but, if we're going to be on midweek all October in Conference
That's
USA.
right.
So if you're looking for something to watch on a Tuesday night, Conference USA football in October, it's a pretty fun time. I think people who try it out will enjoy it. So hopefully some Ole Miss fans become Blue Raider fans. At least for those games, coming up in the future. And it's always exciting this time of year when you have sort of these money games, for lack of a better term, and you're getting to sort of meet some people that you don't normally see on the beat every year. So appreciate you guys having me on, and hopefully, you guys, your fan base learned something a little bit from me today.
Yeah, look, man, you're not going to find any two people that are bigger fans of midweek college football, whether that be Matching, Conference USA, whatever it is.
G5,
we're going to sit down and we're going to watch every single G5 game throughout the week that's ever been on, man. That's the best time of year. It is. It is the best time of year whenever that gets started.
Yeah, both teams are just wide open. Like the whole game, it's just wide ass open, and I love it.
Yes, I do too, man. So
it's
going to be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. No question.
All right, buddy. Well, once again, I really appreciate it, man, and good luck Saturday. And I'm sure our paths will cross again at some point.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Thank y'all. Have a good night.
Thanks,
See
man.
you, Sam.